The Zarkak Sentinel drifted silently through Earth's orbital periphery, its quantum-adaptive camouflage rendering it invisible to human detection systems. Inside the ship's observation deck, Junior Analyst Kriax reviewed the latest data streams with a mixture of boredom and professional detachment. Holographic displays flickered with intercepted human communications, a chaotic mosaic of images, sounds, and data fragments that seemed incomprehensible to the alien observer. News broadcasts, social media clips, military training videos, and what appeared to be entertainment media swirled in a dizzying array. Another primitive species, Kriax muttered, mandibles clicking with dismissive certainty. Tribal. Fractured. Technologically infantile. The ship's primary observer, Senior Analyst Vornek, leaned over the junior shoulder. His scaled fingers swiped through the data streams, pausing momentarily on a compilation of human survival stories. A video played of a mountain climber cutting off his own arm after being trapped for days. Another showed a firefighter rescuing a child from a burning building. Yet another depicted a soldier carrying wounded comrades through enemy territory. Something about the images made Vornek's secondary neural cluster twitch, an uncomfortable sensation he couldn't quite explain. Meanwhile, in a nondescript research facility on the outskirts of Mexico City, Dr. Maya Rodriguez reviewed her own set of data. Her workspace was a controlled chaos of monitors, each displaying different streams of information. Military reports, xenobiological research, psychological profile analyses, and something more. A classified project that had consumed the last 7 years of her life. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unnamed contact. Orbital anomaly detected. Potential non-terrestrial signature. Dr. Rodriguez didn't look surprised. Her eyes, dark and calculating, had seen this coming for years. Back on the Zarkak Sentinel, Kriax continued compiling the initial reconnaissance report. The standard template was familiar. Technological assessment, cultural fragmentation analysis, potential resource extraction recommendations. Yet something nagged at the junior analyst's mind. A particular video caught his attention. It wasn't a military footage or a survival story. Instead, it was a documentary about human endurance, marathon runners pushing beyond physical limits, deep-sea explorers surviving impossible conditions, scientists working in Antarctic research stations during months of total darkness. Kriax felt an unfamiliar sensation. Curiosity. "Commander," he called to Vornek, "I'm detecting some anomalies in our initial assessment." Vornek's response was immediate and dismissive. "Elaborate." "The human capacity for adaptation seems unconventional. These creatures don't just survive. They deliberately place themselves in environments that should be fatal. And then they succeed." The senior analyst watched the footage. A rock climber free-soloing a massive cliff. A deep-sea welder repairing underwater structures. A test pilot pushing an experimental aircraft beyond known performance limits. "Preliminary recommendation," Kriax continued, his voice gaining an unexpected tremor. "We may need to recategorize human potential." Vornek's response was lost in the background hum of the ship's systems. Unbeknownst to both aliens, Dr. Rodriguez was already preparing a response that would change everything. In that moment, humanity's first true contact with an alien civilization was taking shape, not through diplomatic channels or military encounters, but through a series of seemingly random data streams that would challenge everything the Zarkaks thought they knew about intelligent life. The overlooked predators were about to be noticed. The United Nations conference room fell silent as Commander Vexnar of the Zarkaks Diplomatic Corps stepped forward. His iridescent exoskeleton gleamed under the artificial lights, a stark contrast to the muted business attire of the human delegates. Behind him, a contingent of alien diplomats shifted uncomfortably, their translators humming with an almost perceptible sense of superiority. Dr. Maya Rodriguez sat in the back of the room, her fingers dancing subtly across a tablet. To anyone watching, she appeared disinterested. But her eyes, sharp, calculating, missed nothing. Representatives of Earth. Vexnar began, his translated voice a mechanical drone. Your species has been selected for preliminary resource integration. Your planet's biodiversity and mineral resources will be efficiently cataloged and redistributed across the Zarkax Collective. Ambassador James Rice, a veteran diplomat with a reputation for unflappable composure, leaned forward. The room held its breath. I see, Rice responded, a slight smile playing at the corner of his mouth. And how exactly do you propose we discuss this? Integration. The alien commander seemed momentarily confused by the diplomatic pleasantry. In Zarkax protocol, this would be the moment of submission. Instead, he found himself facing a human who appeared more amused than threatened. Unbeknownst to the diplomats, a global network was already in motion. Military strategists, scientists, and communication experts were analyzing every millisecond of the interaction. In a hidden facility beneath the conference center, Dr. Rodriguez watched the live feed, her fingers typing a complex sequence of commands. Vexnar continued his prepared speech, detailing the generous terms of Earth's potential assimilation. Each word was a calculated attempt to demonstrate absolute technological and cultural superiority. Humans would be workers. Humans would be resources. Humans would comply. What Vexnar didn't realize was that humans had a different concept of diplomacy. Ambassador Reyes waited precisely 7.3 seconds after the alien's monologue. Then he did something completely unexpected. He laughed. Not a nervous laugh. Not a diplomatic chuckle. A full, deep, genuine laugh that seemed to catch everyone, human and alien, completely off guard. Let me get this straight, Rice said, wiping a tear of mirth from his eye. You've traveled across light years to tell us you want our stuff. Have you seen our internet? The translation matrix struggled momentarily, uncertain how to process the contextual humor. Vexnar's neural translator flickered. I do not understand the relevance of your global information network to our diplomatic proposal. Oh, it's entirely relevant. Rice continued, his smile never wavering. We're a species that turns everything, and I mean everything, into either a meme, a weapon, or both. Usually both. In that moment, the first seeds of confusion were planted in the alien delegation's collective consciousness. Dr. Rodriguez allowed herself the slightest smile. Phase 1 was complete. Across the globe, military installations, research centers, and communication networks hummed with a newfound energy. The aliens had made first contact, believing it would be a simple transaction. They had no idea what was coming. The viral clip of the diplomatic meeting would spread faster than any alien communication network could track. Millions would watch. Billions would share. And the Zarkax would slowly realize that they had just poked something far more complex than they could comprehend. Humanity's first response to a potential galactic threat was not fear. It was weaponized absurdity. Dr. Ravi Mehta's laboratory looked nothing like a typical military research facility. Sprawling 3D printers hummed alongside modified gaming computers. Holographic displays flickered with complex algorithms, while shelves lined with seemingly random consumer electronics stood next to advanced prototype weapons. They think technology is linear, Mehta muttered to himself, fingers dancing across multiple interfaces. We don't build technology. We weaponize creativity. The first Zarkax assault came precisely 72 hours after the diplomatic meeting. Massive energy weapons descended from orbit, targeting what the aliens believed were critical human infrastructure points. Their battle strategies were mathematically perfect, a complex algorithm of destruction that had subjugated hundreds of species across the galaxy. What they didn't understand was human improvisation. As the first energy weapons struck, something unexpected happened. Instead of total destruction, the targeted areas seemed to adapt. In Detroit, an auto manufacturing plant's robotic systems immediately reconfigured. Welding arms became defensive turrets. Conveyor belts transformed into emergency communication networks. The facility wasn't just a target, it was becoming a weapon. In Tokyo, a consumer electronics megastore became a battlefield command center. Smartphone components were rapidly integrated into communication jammers. Flat-screen televisions became makeshift sensor arrays. Drones assembled from camera parts and delivery robot components swarmed the alien landing zones. Aboard the Zarkax command ship, senior tactician Noel Rack watched in mounting horror. "Their technology doesn't follow any predictable pattern," he reported to the High Command. "Defensive systems are emerging from consumer infrastructure, agricultural equipment. This is impossible." A farmer in Kansas had turned his combine harvester into a mobile electronic warfare platform. A high school robotics team in Mumbai was reprogramming industrial cooling systems into electromagnetic pulse generators. A group of game developers in San Francisco had weaponized their AI algorithms into complex defensive networks. Dr. Mehta's true genius wasn't in creating weapons. It was in understanding that in human hands, anything could become a weapon. The Zarkax had prepared for military confrontation. They had not prepared for a species that could turn a smartphone, a coffee maker, and a drone into a tactical defense system. Tactical analysis, Commander Vexnar demanded. "Give me a breakdown of human technological response." The report was maddeningly inconclusive. Technological adaptation rates exceeded all known galactic metrics. Weapon systems emerged from what should have been civilian infrastructure. Communication networks appeared and disappeared like quantum ghosts. Dr. Maya Rodriguez watched the initial confrontation from her classified research center. A slight smile crossed her lips. "They're learning," she said to no one in particular. Exactly as predicted. The first wave of Zarkax invasion forces began to realize they weren't fighting a conventional enemy. They were fighting an entire species that saw the entire world as a potential weapon system. A teenager in Brazil reconfigured a 3D printer to produce emergency communication components. A retired electrical engineer in Australia turned his home solar system into a localized defense grid. A group of college students transformed their campus network into an intelligence-gathering platform. Humanity wasn't just fighting back. It was having fun doing it. The technological nightmare for the Zarkax had only just begun. The first truly devastating weapon wasn't a missile, a laser, or an electromagnetic pulse. It was a documentary. Dr. Maya Rodriguez sat in a nondescript control room, surrounded by screens displaying global communication networks, alien intercept channels, and real-time psychological response metrics. Her team, a carefully selected group of linguists, psychologists, media experts, and data analysts, had been preparing for this moment for years. "Release Vector Alpha," she commanded quietly. Across multiple alien communication networks, a carefully crafted documentary began to stream. It wasn't a military propaganda piece. It was something far more dangerous. An unfiltered look at human resilience. The documentary started with seemingly random stories. A surgeon who continued operating during a hurricane, a group of miners trapped underground for weeks, who maintained a complex social structure and kept each other alive. Firefighters who ran into burning buildings, search and rescue teams working in impossible conditions. But it was the context that made it truly devastating. Each story was presented without heroic music, no dramatic voiceover. Just raw, unedited human experiences of survival, cooperation, and inexplicable determination. On the Zarkax training vessels, entire classes of cadets watched in stunned silence. Commander Vexnar received the first reports of mass psychological destabilization. Alien cadets weren't just watching the documentary. They were experiencing something closer to an existential crisis. How is this possible? He demanded of his chief psychological warfare analyst. The response was chilling in its simplicity. They don't see obstacles. They see challenges to be overcome. Dr. Ravi Mehta watched the psychological warfare unfold from his improvised command center. Alongside him, a team of specialists from disciplines that shouldn't logically work together. Game designers, trauma psychologists, viral marketing experts, and military strategists monitored the global response. It's not about the content, Meta explained to a bewildered military attaché. It's about the underlying message. Humans don't just survive. We transform survival into an art form. The documentary was just the beginning. Social media platforms became battlegrounds of psychological manipulation. Memes that contained complex strategic information spread faster than any alien communication network could track. Every joke, every shared story became a potential weapon. Alien intelligence networks discovered something terrifying. Humans communicated in layers of meaning that defied traditional analysis. A simple cat video could contain more strategic information than a standard military report. On alien training vessels, half the cadets began to question everything they'd been taught about conquest and superiority. Some requested transfers. Some outright resigned. Some began to secretly admire the species they were supposed to be conquering. Dr. Rodriguez allowed herself a rare moment of satisfaction. The first wave of psychological warfare was working perfectly. The Zarkax had come expecting a conventional war. They were getting something far more complex. A complete reimagining of what conflict could mean. In training halls across the alien collective, cadets watched footage of humans, not as victims, not as conquerors, but as something entirely unexpected. A species that didn't just face challenges. A species that transformed challenges into opportunities. The psychological turning point had begun. The Zarkax never saw the counteroffensive coming. Not because it was sophisticated, but because it was fundamentally ridiculous. Dr. Ravi Mehta's latest weapon was something that would make military strategists worldwide either laugh or weep. A distributed network of modified consumer electronics, internet memes, and what could only be described as weaponized absurdity. They think in straight lines, Mehta muttered, adjusting a circuit board that was once part of a karaoke machine. We think in fractals. The first strike came through channels the Zarkax had never considered vulnerable. Social media platforms became real-time tactical communication networks. Viral dance challenges contained encrypted military coordinates. Gaming servers transformed into distributed computing platforms for strategic analysis. A group of professional esports players in South Korea discovered they could use their ultra-low latency communication skills to coordinate drone swarms more effectively than traditional military communication protocols. Their team communication, developed over years of competitive gaming, became an impossible-to-crack tactical language. In Sao Paulo, a collective of street artists and programmers created what they called mimetic warfare units. They developed AI algorithms that could generate communication patterns so complex and contextually bizarre that alien communication interceptors would spend weeks trying to decode what was essentially sophisticated nonsense. Aboard the Zarkax command ship, senior tactician Nulrak was losing his mind. Their attack patterns make no mathematical sense. He screamed at his subordinates, "This is not warfare. This is chaos." Which was, precisely, the point. Dr. Maya Rodriguez watched the counteroffensive from her command center, a hint of a smile playing on her lips. Every seemingly random action was part of a larger, almost incomprehensible strategy. A farmer in Iowa reprogrammed agricultural drones to create massive, constantly shifting communication arrays. A high school robotics team in Mumbai turned their competition robots into electronic warfare platforms. A group of deep-sea researchers used underwater acoustic technologies in ways that completely scrambled alien sensor systems. The Zarkax had prepared for conventional warfare. They had prepared for asymmetric warfare. They had not prepared for whatever this was. "We're not fighting," Dr. Mehta explained to a bewildered military attaché. "We're performing an improvised, planet-wide hack of their entire operational concept." Alien communication networks began to experience cascading failures, not through direct attacks, but through an information ecosystem so dynamic and unpredictable that their rigid computational systems simply couldn't process the input. A viral video of a cat playing piano contained more strategic information than a standard military transmission. A multiplayer online game became a real-time strategic planning platform. Blockchain technologies were repurposed into unhackable communication networks. The truly terrifying part for the Zarkax was the humans seemed to be enjoying this. Every alien tactical analysis returned the same impossible conclusion. The humans were treating a potential extinction-level conflict like an elaborate, planet-wide collaborative game. They're not just defending. Nolrak reported to the High Command, his voice a mix of terror and reluctant admiration. They're playing. And in that play, they were winning in ways no conventional military doctrine could comprehend. The counteroffensive wasn't just a military strategy. It was a planetary-scale performance art piece of technological rebellion. The Zarkax High Command convened in their most secure neural conference chamber, a space designed to be impenetrable, unbreakable, absolute. Commander Vexnar stood at the center, his exoskeleton now dull and scratched, his once impeccable demeanor fractured. "Explain," he demanded, "how a single species has dismantled 3 centuries of galactic military doctrine." The holographic displays told a story of complete strategic collapse. Human responses defied every known computational model. Where the Zarkax expected linear resistance, they found a multi-dimensional nightmare of adaptation. Dr. Maya Rodriguez watched the alien internal communications, a skill that had taken years of careful preparation. Each intercepted transmission revealed more than the aliens realized. Their communication wasn't just being monitored. It was being comprehended, manipulated, turned inside out. "They're not just fighting," she muttered to her team. "They're deconstructing our entire conceptual framework." On the alien training vessels, the psychological breakdown reached critical mass. Entire cadet classes were experiencing what could only be described as an existential crisis. The documentary about human resilience had been just the beginning. Now, a flood of human cultural artifacts, music, art, literature, scientific discoveries, painted a picture of a species that was fundamentally incomprehensible. A Zarkax psychological warfare specialist submitted a report that was equal parts terror and reluctant admiration. Humans didn't just resist. They transformed resistance into an art form. Dr. Ravi Mehta's latest innovation was perhaps his most brilliant, a communication network that was simultaneously a weapon, a communication platform, and a piece of performance art. Gaming servers, social media platforms, and scientific research networks merged into a fluid, impossible-to-track information ecosystem. "We're not defending," Mehta explained to a group of bewildered military strategists. "We're rewriting the entire concept of conflict." The alien high command discovered something terrifying. Humans were treating a potential extinction-level conflict like a collaborative, planet-wide improvisation exercise. Tactical networks collapsed. Communication systems became unreliable. Every time the Zarkax thought they had understood human strategy, the entire paradigm would shift. A viral meme contained more strategic information than a standard military transmission. A multiplayer online game became a real-time strategic planning platform. Blockchain technologies transformed into unhackable communication networks. Senior tactician Nolrak's final report was a masterpiece of confused terror. The humans do not fight. They perform. Every defensive action is simultaneously a cultural statement, a technological innovation, and a form of collective psychological warfare. Our computational models cannot process their fundamental approach to existence. The breaking point wasn't a single moment. It was a gradual realization that everything the Zarkax understood about warfare, about resistance, about survival, was fundamentally wrong. Humans weren't just fighting an invasion. They were reimagining the entire concept of conflict. And in that reimagining, the Zarkax found themselves completely, utterly lost. Commander Vexnar looked at the holographic displays. Humans weren't just resisting. They were transforming the very nature of resistance itself. The invasion was becoming something else entirely. A planetary-scale improvisation. A collaborative act of creative rebellion. The Zarkax were no longer conquering. They were being comprehensively, brilliantly, impossibly defeated. The final confrontation was nothing like anyone expected. Dr. Maya Rodriguez stood in a global command center that looked more like a creative studio than a military installation. Screens displayed a dizzying array of information: communication networks, cultural transmissions, scientific data, and something that could only be described as a planetary-scale collaborative performance. "We're not just defending," she said to the assembled team of scientists, artists, military strategists, and programmers. "We're proposing an entirely new approach to existence." The Zarkax command ship hung in orbit, its once imposing structure now looking more like a confused artifact than a weapon of conquest. Commander Vexnar watched in total bewilderment as humanity's response continued to defy every computational model. Dr. Ravi Mehta's final strategic innovation was perhaps his most brilliant. A global network that was simultaneously a defensive system, a communication platform, a cultural exchange, and a work of collaborative art. Every system, from agricultural networks to gaming servers, had become part of a living, breathing planetary intelligence. The invasion was no longer a conflict. It had become a conversation. Alien communication interceptors discovered something terrifying. Humans weren't just resisting. They were inviting the Zarkax to understand them. Every defensive action was simultaneously an invitation, a challenge, and a form of cultural education. A group of linguists had developed communication protocols that were part language, part mathematical theorem, part performance art. They weren't just translating. They were creating entirely new forms of understanding. "We're not fighting them," one of the linguists explained. "We're teaching them how to see the world differently." The Zarkax High Command received transmissions that defied all previous understanding. Scientific discoveries, musical compositions, mathematical theorems, philosophical treatises. Each transmission was a multidimensional object that was simultaneously a weapon, a peace offering, and a work of art. Entire alien cadet classes were experiencing what could only be described as a collective awakening. The documentary about human resilience had been just the beginning. Now, a flood of human cultural artifacts, music, art, literature, scientific discoveries, painted a picture of a species that was fundamentally unclassifiable. Commander Vexnar's final report was a masterpiece of confused admiration. The humans do not conquer. They transform. Every interaction is simultaneously a defensive action, a cultural statement, and an invitation to reimagine existence. The decisive moment wasn't a battle. It was a moment of mutual comprehension. Humans weren't just defending their planet. They were offering the Zarkax an entirely new way of understanding reality. Dr. Rodriguez watched the final transmissions with a sense of profound satisfaction. The invasion was becoming something else entirely, a planetary-scale dialogue, a collaborative act of mutual understanding. The Zarkax were no longer invaders. They had become students, learners in a school of human possibility. As the final transmissions went out, humanity had done something unprecedented. They had transformed a potential extinction-level conflict into a moment of collective growth. The universe watched and learned. 5 years after the invasion, the world had become something entirely unexpected. The United Nations headquarters now resembled a cross between a scientific research center, a cultural exchange platform, and an art installation. Delegates from Earth sat alongside former Zarkax military personnel, their conversations a complex tapestry of scientific discovery, philosophical exploration, and collaborative problem-solving. Dr. Maya Rodriguez stood at the window, watching a mixed human-alien research team prepare for a deep space exploration mission. The conflict that once threatened human extinction had transformed into humanity's greatest opportunity for growth. "We didn't just survive," she explained to a group of visiting alien cadets. "We reimagined what survival could mean." The Zarkax, who had once sought to conquer, now sought to understand. Entire academic disciplines had emerged from the conflict: Shin'up psychology, interspecies communication theory, adaptive conflict resolution. What had begun as an invasion had become a profound cultural and scientific renaissance. Dr. Ravi Mehta's research center had become the epicenter of a new kind of technological innovation. Technologies developed during the conflict were now being applied to solve global challenges: climate change, resource distribution, healthcare. The defensive systems that once protected Earth now work to protect entire planetary ecosystems. A group of former alien cadets, those who had watched the human documentary and quit their military training, had become the most passionate advocates for interspecies understanding. They traveled the galaxy, sharing the story of how humanity had transformed a potential extinction event into a moment of collective growth. The documentation of the conflict had become something more than a historical record. It was a living, evolving narrative, part scientific treatise, part cultural mythology, part philosophical exploration. Schools across multiple planetary systems studied it not as a story of war, but as a case study in adaptive intelligence. Commander Vexnar, once the lead alien invasion strategist, now sat on the UN's Interspecies Collaborative Research Council. His transformation was symbolic of a broader change, from conquest to curiosity, from invasion to investigation. "We came to take," he would often say in his lectures, "and we learned to participate." The technologies developed during the conflict defied traditional categorization. Communication networks that were simultaneously defensive systems, cultural exchange platforms, and works of collaborative art. Technological innovations that blurred the lines between science, culture, and creativity. Dr. Rodriguez reflected on the journey. The invasion had never been about physical conquest. It had been a catalyst, a moment that forced humanity to reimagine its own potential. The alien cadets who had watched the original documentary, the one that had caused half their training corps to quit, now became ambassadors of a new kind of understanding. They shared not just the story of human resilience, but the deeper lesson of human possibility. Earth had not just defended itself. It had expanded the very concept of what intelligent life could be. The military installations that once prepared for defense now hosted joint research programs. The communication networks that once scrambled alien transmissions now facilitated unprecedented levels of interspecies collaboration. As the sun set over the UN headquarters, Dr. Rodriguez smiled. The greatest victory was not in defeating an enemy. It was in transforming the very concept of enmity. The universe watched and continued to learn.